Hello and welcome to the Media Roundtable. We're going to do this live as we have never done this live. And I don't even know if my microphone is working or you're hearing it off of the laptop. But this is true podcasting when you're getting people together at the last minute with a loosely formed agenda. And it's really about raw authenticity. Podcasting is really about the conversation more than it is about anything about sound quality or production professionalism or any of that. It's about what we're going to talk about, and we have some very exciting topics to cover today because we all just got back from podcast movement. If you work in this industry, you know the podcast movement for many years has been, I think, the main. If podcasting ever had a home, it's a podcast movement. That's where everybody in the industry comes together to talk about, what are we experiencing in our own businesses? What are creators experiencing? What are advertisers experiencing? What are the challenges and opportunities, and to work through that together? And so we're going to do that today. Of course, we're always a little bit extra focused on the needs of what we've been calling the chief audio officer. And that is the advertiser who helps keep the lights on for everybody through ad support. But really, we're going to talk about some major changes that have happened even in the last week. And we're going to unpack what that means for you all that are so invested in this space. As a friendly reminder, I'm your host, Dan Granger. I'm the CEO of Oxford Road. And we have a wonderful lineup of people who were all on the ground with me. I think we probably had like 10,000 people actually at the event this year, but we got three of them to get together and join me here. We have Courtney O'Connor, who is Director of Podcast Media at Oxford Road. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you for having me.
We have Julia Palermo, who is on our digital media team, who always has great insights. I think she was on stage as well. Welcome, Julia.
Excited to be here.
And we have James Ingracia, who leads our strategy efforts at Oxford Road. He was covering a lot of ground. James, thanks for being with us today.
Anytime. Glad to be here.
Now, I don't want to bury the lead, which I have so far, but, probably the biggest, most talked about topic all week was the recent announcement of the merger between Sounds Profitable and the entity that we think of as Podcast Movement. And I'm pleased to say that we have a special guest appearance from the individual who's really at the center of all this as the new incoming president of Podcast Movement and the full entity, and that is Bryan Barletta. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, thanks for doing it last minute. And I know we don't have you the full time, so I think we should get to you first. Do you mind just giving the recap? I know you've done it 10,000 times in the last week, but bring us up to speed on what you did and why you did it and what it means for everybody else.
Yeah, Sounds Profitable is celebrating 5 years now. Basically, it was 5 years ago that we started it, and it's been through multiple different iterations of what it is. But I mean, I think that we finally settled on trade association. I think that was our goals and what we built towards. It's kind of hard to do that when you have other groups like the IAB, the NAB, and everything there. But we were able to build that through line. And there's some nuances with podcasting that we learned along the way. I think price sensitivity is definitely one of them. I think for organization fees and the benefits and what people are looking for. And the other is just connections and networking. Exactly like what you said. It's about the conversation and the opportunity to have those conversations. And I think we really cracked that over the 5 years as we've continued to grow to now over 200 partners and a global presence. And Podcast Movement was our home, right? Like we started under Pod News, which is half owned by Podcast Movement. Very early on, I think when Tom came on, we did a full one-day event at Podcast Movement Dallas in, I guess it would be 2022. And from there, we've just kind of taken up space, right? We've grabbed space for our partners and figured out what they needed out of those events. And that really shaped our event strategy over that time period where we've expanded into other events where we've, bought the scraps, polished them and made them valuable for people and gotten people on stage and people visible in ways they would not have planned previously. And so the opportunity came up as we were seeing, the space changes every 2 years. It feels like a brand new industry. And so we, made a concerted effort to preserve and grow what podcast movement is, because I think for so many people, it is where they got their shot, and it is something that means something to them. And we pitched a vision, and they ended up acquiring Sounds Profitable entirely. The company, the people that work at Podcast Movement have all been retained under Event Movement, which is Dan Franks' company that executes on the event. And then me and the team, as well as Christy from the Podcast Movement team, will be the ones running the day-to-day between both Sounds Profitable and Podcast Movement, to really kind of be there for what's next, not just reactionary.
Well, so there's a lot to unpack within this. Let's just start with the business you started, Sounds Profitable. What changes with Sounds Profitable?
Ideally, nothing. I mean, we've been a very lean team. We're at over 200 partners. I think there's sometime around 250 partners where we might have to evaluate the half an hour monthly consulting becoming an hour per quarter. But I still do all of that. I'm on calls 8+ hours a day. I love it. And I think that was really the appeal to the teams at Podcast Movement, because Dan Franks is killer at running events. They built out 2 other avenues for events. And in those areas, he has someone specifically like in the card game area or in the Bitcoin area. But in podcasting, I mean, I spend all of my time talking to everybody, and that's a full-time job, as well as needing to figure out the other stuff that we're doing. So that combination, I think, is really valuable. So I have no plans right now to change anything, and more just figure out how we benefit more of our partners and give more people reasons to become partners. Not only to benefit more at potentially Podcast Movement events, but also to the other events that we run through the year.
So it's not the brand of Sounds Profitable doesn't change at all. And the newsletter for Podcast Movement, which is kind of interesting because they've had a really great list and database of people in this industry, going 365 with it. And you've been really making the newsletter kind of home base for your business. Does that shift at all, or is that something that that you determine? What do you think?
We are now, God, we have so many email lists, right? To simplify it, how many different email lists do we have access to? We have access to everybody who's ever bought a ticket or attended Podcast Movement that's opted into marketing. And there is an opted in newsletter for Podcast Movement. There's Pod News, there's the Podcast Business Journal, there's the daily and weekly download from Sounds Profitable, there's the weekly thought leadership piece from Sounds Profitable. We are really focused on figuring out how to make that valuable for everybody to reduce some of the overlap. And I think the advantage there for us is that ads haven't been a major driver of basically all of those newsletters. So if we need to consolidate something to benefit people, there's no loss in revenue. And we don't have to say like, well, we're going to keep this bloat because it makes us money. We can figure out how we do right by our partners. And so that's the advantage here with James Cridlin really, really being so recharged and so excited to collaborate with us on this. Tom Webster from our side and James have been sitting down, and they're going to lead a lot of the content decisions. But I sent out an email this morning. I said, what's our total reach per list? What's our unique reach and all that? Who are we addressing? Because there's some amazing things we could do. Imagine if we pulled everybody together and said, hey, this week, we want everybody to listen to this podcast and give your feedback and your insights, right? Even if 10% of whatever that combined list chooses to engage with that, could we chart somebody who hasn't gotten a chart, like a shot, right? Like, who are we reaching and how big is that reach? So it's going to be really exciting to see and explore that. And the best part about that is like, it's in service to all of you. It's not in service to ad sales, which I'm very, very happy that the overwhelming majority of our newsletter and content output has no ads, so that we don't have to make those tough decisions.
Yeah. And so, I mean, one of the kind of more subtle parts of this announcement is James getting more involved in the programming, and now Tom getting involved in the programming. So what can you forecast for us about what the content may look like that's different in the future?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough to say we're recording this 1 week out. I worked all weekend. Like, I spent time with the kids. They went to bed, and I was like, you know what? I'll play a video game. I mean, I'll just answer all my emails and write out my plans. We have a whiteboard that's the whole length of the office wall over there. It's full, man. Like, I've been in spreadsheets and ideas and just figuring out all of these things. What I can say though is that, like, we acknowledge that we're a primarily white male run company, and so the first thing that I'm going to say is you won't see me speaking on stage at Podcast Movement anymore. I have the opportunity to speak at so many stages around the world in different places. I have the ability to influence the content and help drive that as a committee. Tom is a wildly good speaker and moderator and MC. Same with James. And so if we look at it, that's who I want to lean into on that end. But not everything they do necessarily means they're in the spotlight either. How do we learn from James? Everything we're asking James to do, James has done that for years, potentially decades. I don't want to make him sound old, but at other events, radio days, and at Podcast Show London. And so I'm excited to hear from him what does and doesn't work, how people want their time respected, what you can ask for free versus what requires an honorarium, how to build better content and opportunities and set that up. So we're really going to try and revisit as much of it as possible, because there really is that line between, like, this is where we want everybody's attention to focus, and this is where things that the audience and the attendees want to hear from, and this is what people want to pay to be able to say in a public forum and a recorded forum. So we want to make space for all of that, because not everything needs to be center stage, but we can still spotlight it. And that's also a big reason why all of the content from this year was recorded audio and video. That was a last minute change. And then we got rid of the virtual ticket because it is about the conversations. We need to educate as many people as possible. And I want to encourage people to come there. But if you can't make it, I want you to be able to learn from it.
Understood. And then, so it sounds like a lot of this is you're building the plane in flight. Sounds like it came together relatively quickly. But and maybe you don't have a clear thesis yet on, like, what are the different tracks going forward from the standpoint of, there's an industry track, a monetization track, a creator track, like how that's going to look. Sounds like we don't know yet, but maybe some of the stuff that's on your whiteboard will be expressed more so over time.
Well, I would say that Sounds Profitable has been entirely built, like, as we're flying the plane. I think the big thing here is that, like, if it's a Sounds Profitable related task, I can get back to you in 20 minutes. Like, we can move on this right now. You need me to fly out somewhere and we got to go pitch a client or something, like, let's go. But the next time I can prove myself to you guys is South by Southwest or September in New York for the main event, right? That is going to be a big experience for us. So mostly, like, we have venues to finalize, and then we want to hear from the people who help sponsor and support this and the people who attend it, what they want out of it. And so maybe it's going to be less tracks to start, but I think in a change like this with the venues and the focus, there's no better time to contract on what we put out there and see, like, I would love to sell out more and have waiting room, like FOMO on that end, and have panels that are packed and standing room only. Then I would like to have empty space, or in just the event itself, or in any of the rooms. So you can always grow bigger. It is often very difficult to make things smaller. Not saying that this is going to be smaller in impact or anything there, but probably not Javits Center in the first year.
Well, and you've been doing a lot to program at South by Southwest the last few years, but there's also been this thing called Podcast Movement Evolutions, and it sounds like that's now going away. So should we think about what you're going to be doing at South by? It sounds like you're going to do a multiple events, but the South by event is going to be like the secondary tentpole. And should we expect that to be more like Podcast Movement Evolutions? How do you think about the distinction, other than just location, between that and the fall event?
Yeah, I mean, looking at Evolutions and the main event, I think they lost the ability to distinguish between the two. And I think that, like, LA was a really big part of that. And while I am upset to not have it go to LA, South by Southwest has been where a lot of people are spending time and attention. And I think it's really valuable because it's bigger than podcasting. And what we're doing there is we have 3 days for the official podcast track. So our ideal scenario is that not only do we run and oversee that podcast track, but how do we have an additional stage for people who maybe don't have a ticket? How do we have activation space? How do we take advantage of live shows at night? If you look at the podcast companies that go to South by right now, there are a substantial number of the major companies that are not there with a footprint. So how do we buy collectively that footprint? So on our end, I mean, it changes the format of the event. There's no tickets that we're going to sell. It still will be an event that we execute. There still will be sponsorship and opportunities there, but there's no hub for podcasting. iHeart does great things. Spotify does great things, but they're destinations for them. How do we pull in SiriusXM and Acast and you guys and all those things and say like, hey, collectively, this is where we're going to invite everybody to. There's stuff that you do need a South by ticket. There's stuff that you don't. And look, that I looked at the year and I said like, okay, I guess there's nothing in April. Maybe we could put something in April, but what are we going to say at South by in March that we're not going to say also in Podcast Show London in May? 2 events that were already heavily built into that would be honest to you guys. It would literally just be selling you another ticket. And we don't need to do that. Like podcasting as an industry needs to spend in bigger places. So we need to put our money where our mouth is. And so realistically, this turned, at least for the first year, an event that did make money into something that hopefully breaks even and creates a string of value for everybody and is a real big swing for us.
Yeah. And Bryan, I feel like going into Podcast Movement Dallas this year, not to mention it was in Dallas the middle of August, but I feel like there was a lack of momentum going in, that everyone kind of felt sluggish going in. And then I think this news breaking on Sunday, it was like, okay, wait, this is the last time we're going to be at a Gaylord. We're re-envisioning what these industry events look like, because by the time we get to August, we're on our 5th or 6th industry event that we're hearing the same thing over and over again about. So I think from my perspective and folks that I talked to at the event this year, they're excited about this being the last one and reimagining what these events look like, because as the industry has evolved, we haven't really evolved our event structure besides the introduction of South by.
And you're right, but there's little things that we're going to lose, and I'm trying to figure out how do we hold on to as much as possible. Like you come back to the hotel and it's 11:30 from whatever party or event you went to, and you're exhausted, and you're like, well, maybe I'll do a lap around the bar. And then it's 3 a.m. right? And it's like all these conversations and whatnot. And it really is, it's so hard to explain to anybody who's not in podcasting, like how tight knit we all are, how like we all really like, there's no competitors really. We are competing, but then we go to dinner together. Like that didn't happen in mobile advertising. That doesn't happen in CTV. So there's some parts that we're going to have to figure out what that means and how we keep that. But we have a lot of people that are really invested in that. So I'm excited. I think we gain more than we lose, but I acknowledge that we're going to lose some things.
And Bryan, I know we got to let you go in a second here. I guess last question is, can you give us a preview of what people should expect that will be different in the fall?
Man, well, early September in New York, we want to make it accessible for, I think it'll be a while before we nail fans, and I'm interested in becoming a podcast creator, but I'm interested in becoming a better podcast creator or taking it more seriously. I think we're going to win those people back. But people keep asking us, why do we keep focusing on the creators? It's because literally for the business side in New York, early September might be all I need to do to make everybody happy for the first year. But Dan Franks, it's Monday, August 25th. Dan Franks is coming in tomorrow, and we're going to be spending the whole day together. We're looking at venues, we're looking at everything there. So it really depends on what we think we can get access to. But I think that my minimum goal is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? Just progress on that end. And it's going to be really tough for me to think about this in years and having to really prove ourselves over years versus being able to just iterate and change and go with it. So I think it's going to be small steps, but I think every one of them is going to land. I think that's the big thing. Everything we choose to change is going to resonate well with people. I wish I had more there, but we're looking for people. Yeah, we're looking for people who want to come. Brands are going to come for free. We're figuring out pricing for agencies that respects that as well, and we're going to do a ton of outreach on that. And we want talent there. It's New York. Why wouldn't everybody do live events, right? So we're going to really kind of get everybody to rally together. And the fun part is it's not all going to be on one destination. It's going to be really taking advantage of such a killer city that I really believe for most people is still going to be cheaper than flying out to one of the Gaylord chains of hotels and staying at that hotel. So I really think when you can choose to stay in Staten Island and take public transportation, it's probably going to be way cheaper if that's what you need. But even still being nearby, it's going to be cheaper.
Indeed. Well, listen, we appreciate you coming on at the last minute. We know you got a lot on your plate, and congratulations.
Thank you.
No doubt, this is a smart move for podcast movement. I think it's a smart move for Sounds Profitable, and I have no doubt that this will be a 1 + 1 = 3 for you guys.
Well, thank you so much. My last thing, actually, I figured out the biggest change they're going to be there at both the South by event and the New York event. You're going to do this live.
Yes. Yeah.
That's it. Why? Right? Why aren't the podcast conversations like this?
Live. Yeah, we should be doing more live recordings. Only if I can also be the IT solution.
I got all that equipment set up. It fits right in my bag. But thank you guys so much, and I'm excited to talk to anybody who wants to talk about what we could do together going forward.
Great. Well, thanks for making time for us, Bryan.
Thank you.
That was a nice little cameo that we got here. And Julia and James, we'll start with you. Any reactions from your point of view? The news here.
I'm very eager to see what Bryan does for Podcast Movement New York. I think it's a very big city. Let's see where we land there. But I'm also very curious to see how he blends creators and the industry. Because the one thing I noticed this year over previous years was that the exhibit floor, was, I could probably say 100%, maybe 99% catered towards podcasters and the creators who make the business. There was podcasting equipment and where to host your podcast and how to edit your podcast and how to get guests for your podcast. And I didn't see anything for the industry on the floor. Not saying that's not relevant, but I feel like the industry played a halo role. So while the inside was for creators, the inside track, there definitely were some stages for the industry, but a lot of those conversations took place outside of the floor. And so I'm curious to see how that's going to hold up once we're in New York.
And Julia, how about you? Any hot takes on the change?
Yeah, I think that it was great that Bryan did call out the social aspect. Being in New York, it will be a little bit more spread out, but I'm excited to see a more focused advertiser perspective going in and see what Sounds Profitable can do, because obviously they do so much for our industry through the newsletters and partnerships. So seeing what they can do to get a fresh new spin on podcast movement will be exciting.
Courtney, we did get to hear your voice a little bit, but I'm not sure if you had anything else you wanted to throw in about this. I think it has a lot of, I think the changes are probably yet to be realized, and obviously a lot still coming together, but on its face, anything else that stands out to you?
I like that Bryan mentioned at the end that it's going to be free for brands, and giving brands and CAOs access to the event in New York for free, I think is a big shift from now they need to buy a badge and they need to, put money into it, where they could, take public transit and participate in the event.
So, and so I think there's so much still going on in the industry to cover. We'll park the merger piece there. A few other topics, and we'll go around and cover now some of the other stuff that you all experienced while you were there. I can hold off on the little bit of stage time where I made a presentation about some updates from the advertising side. But one of the things that was announced this week was that there's new listening data that came out sharing that 6.3 hours of podcast listening is happening per week, which is 5% more than last year. And so I'm interested in your perspectives, particularly Courtney and Julia, as we continue to see this industry increase in consumption. What is the consequence of that for advertisers? Is that putting pressure on pricing? Is it creating more inventory? What are you seeing happen as a result of the continued growth of consumption?
I personally feel like this is due to a change of maybe how we're defining podcast and then also how people are consuming podcasts. I frankly think it is a good thing for advertisers because yes, it is opening more inventory. I don't think that it is increasing pricing because it's a supply and demand ecosystem. But I think that it's giving more ability to be in this space for brands, for DR advertisers. And frankly, I think that it's changing what a podcast is. And so it is evolving what the content is that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think the only way that it will potentially impact pricing is the brand dollars coming in. So we work for performance brands and kind of have owned the audio space with that. And more eyeballs means more attention, and more attention means brands who are going to pay maybe bigger dollars than what will work for our performance campaign. So that's, I would say, the only thing to look out for in terms of pricing.
Well, and you mentioned the video piece, and how much of the conversation has shifted, particularly this year, to not just being about podcasts as we have traditionally discussed them, but how much of the conversation is now all about video?
I would say a significant majority of it. I think one of my team's biggest takeaways was simulcast isn't new. Why are we talking like it's brand new? But I think it's just more on the top of people's minds of how are you utilizing simulcast and how are we tracking simulcast and how are we like looking at these video podcasts? So I think the funny thing is while it's not new to us and we've been on stage at Podcast Movements talking about video podcasts for the last 5+ years, everyone's kind of pivoting to how do we utilize this as a tactic? And it's taking up a majority of the discussion, I feel, which I like. We're not talking about impression-based buys.
I mean, no doubt, it is not a new thing. Like Apple had video as an option 15 years ago, right? Like that's not new. But I do wonder the impact of the increase in consumption of video, especially for things that were conventionally thought of as audio first. Now with the video component starting to take that over, and I know Giles did a presentation with Pete at Podscribe, and they, their big kind of reveal was they had a study that suggested that yes, the consumption through video is pretty drastically increasing. Like the share is moving, and I think that is increasing overall consumption. However, I think one of the big takeaways that came out that I saw on stage was them saying, actually, we have data that suggests that the audio impression actually drives more performance, drives better response. Now, can we take that to the bank? Would you bet your life on that? I don't know, because I think for a long time, we've all kind of made an assumption that the video impression may hit harder in terms of impact on performance. They're now bringing something to the table saying the reverse may very well be true. But I think, yes, it's always been there, but how is that starting to impact the way that people are consuming it? Are we seeing it take up more share? Interested if you all have views on that, and certainly if you have a point of view on whether or not the audio or the video impression is actually worth more to an advertiser.
I personally think it is how we're utilizing the video impression. So if we're just having a host sitting on screen reading a script or it's a static logo, then there likely isn't a difference between video and audio. And maybe audio, someone's more tuned in than passively having a video on in the background. But I think that is something that we need to get better at as an industry, is tracking what a video podcast means. Does it mean a static logo on screen? Does it mean actual B-roll utilization or QR codes? Because if we're not utilizing the power of the video, then yes, it's likely not worth an upcharge or worth anything more than an audio impression.
So let me say that back to you, because I think it's an important point that you're making. You're saying that it's not that, static ad on video is less impactful than static ad on audio, like apples to apples. You're saying, so I always throw Theo Vaughn out there because he's so squarely in both groups at the same time. He's like a native podcaster who's got a ton of video consumption, right? So if you're watching Theo's show and he does the live read or he does the host read ad on the show, but there's something interesting happening with video, it's not that the video will hit harder or not. Your premise or your thesis is that it's only as good as what he does with that extra dimension. That's what you're saying, I think. Okay. Yeah. It's an interesting point of view. James, you look like you got something
Yeah,
to.
I also feel like it's the type of podcast that's on video. So if it warrants tuning in and setting up a screen and dedicating time to watch it, that's one thing. But some people are also in the habit of putting it on YouTube, setting it on the counter, putting their AirPods in, and then just going about their day in the house. So there may not be people watching it because you don't have to watch it. So if the show is visually heavy, I think then you probably have a better chance of someone watching it. But if it's not visually heavy and it's just someone behind their anchor desk talking or delivering the news or having a conversation, then I don't know if performance is the same as on audio. So I think the type of engaging content of the podcast, not just the ad, is very important to factor in here.
Julia, anything to add on that, or you with the group?
With the group, I think Courtney mentioned the QR code, and I think that this shift from what was once thought of the video impression being more valuable could also be with developing behaviors, because now a lot of people will watch the YouTube on their TV, which makes the clickable link obsolete. So adding that QR code is another layer that we can go the extra mile to make sure that the ad is getting its full effect.
Yeah, I'm excited about these QR codes. Of course, the issue is on a simulcast now, again, we're taking one completely disparate way of attributing response from the same show and now having to go, well, how many QR code activations came relative to the RSS based clicks that we have a pixel on, and trying to compare those apples to apples for the same frickin' buy. So I don't know. All of these things are, kind of feel like 2 steps forward and 2 steps back all at the same time. But at least it's something to measure, right? At least it's not just a vanity URL in the show description. Okay, so much to talk about still. James, you were there. You got to sit in on some things. You got to have a lot of meetings. Can you tell us about your podcast movement?
Yes, my podcast movement, it was very busy. So I was there with some of our clients and I was meeting with a bunch of our networks, which brings me to my comment earlier where a lot of the meetings happen in the lobby or at restaurants, at the resort that we were at. And they were really, really good. They were great to have that one-on-one time with people that we normally talk with over the phone or on Zoom. And it was also a great way to really directly address some of the challenges that our clients are having and almost brainstorm live with all of them. So I think the fact that this event brings together all of the major players in the network space and the agency space and even some creators who were there, it was a great way to get things done real time on the ground. I will note that I do feel like because of the atmosphere it was in, everyone needed like a quick hour of silence twice a day just to go back to the room for a minute because it brought to
Everyone,
my
or
attention that
you
when
were
you're not
wearing
talking
it
to
by the second day? I noticed
well
that you
some
needed a little decompression time.
what someone brought up to me is that because when you're not having meetings, you're not having lunches, and you're just walking through the concourse, there's rushing water and there's toy trains going by and country music blasting. Like you need a minute just to refocus yourself. And I do for anyone going to future podcast movements, carve in some me time in the morning and the afternoon just to reset yourself.
Yeah, well, especially if you have sensory, we all experience these things differently. Now, not being at the Gaylord may help.
Right.
See, I find the Gaylord's very soothing. It has that kind of Disney contained, like, feels like you're in that little, what do they call it? Arborarium. Where do they keep the birds and the
The
plants?
atriums.
The atrium. Well, yes, it was under an atrium, but I know that I know it burns people out, and particularly if you're the type that needs to go recharge, it can be a bit much. I just from thinking about different stakeholders, though, James, what's kind of interesting is in your world, it doesn't sound like the value for you is really from anything that anybody says on a stage. Like, it doesn't sound like the learning aspect is in the pie chart of why do you go to something like this. It sounds like for you, it's very much about those conversations that happen in the meetings when you're not sitting there listening to somebody on a panel or whatever. Is
So
that
yeah, that's interesting that you say that because I would agree with you on that end. And not to say that can't learn something from someone, and actually maybe it's beneficial to go listen to some of the creator tracks to kind of hear how they're positioning things. But the overwhelming meetings that I had were with our team, our clients, and then our sales reps at all the networks, who I also think do not go into the conference to learn about advances in the medium because they're working on positioning their network for our partners. So I do think that there could be something for that contingent of people. But I also feel like just having one central place for everyone to come in together for 3 days is also it's a good positioning statement that everyone was there. And I'll say too, just from setting up meetings, like even like whatever the saying is, like best laid plans fall or whatever it is, you have all these meetings and every 20 steps you're running into someone you didn't realize was going to be there. And then that turns into another meeting, or I'm going to meet you for coffee later, or I'll talk to you later, or introduce them to someone else. And so many more meaningful connections were made just by happenstance versus being pre-scheduled for weeks in advance.
Yeah, it's amazing the meetings that you happen that you didn't plan for, and all the people you run into. And you get into this industry, and most of us never leave. And the relationship piece, boy, how you treat people is important, because you got to live with these people whether they are at your company or not. You will see them again. You will be spending time together. So play. It's good reminder to play the long game in your dealings. So yeah, that's interesting. I won't give more commentary right now because I want to hear what Courtney and Julia about your podcast movements. Courtney, you kind of gathered a lot of the feedback from a number of people who attended, and so I know you're speaking not only on your behalf but on behalf of many others. What were some of what was your podcast movement all about? What were the key findings?
Yeah, well, in summary, the stats is we were there for a collective 4 days, and I think we had 45 scheduled meetings, and then those hall meetings that James alluded to. And truthfully, the podcast team goes into this event of how many partners can we see and have face-to-face discussions with, and maybe even get deals done. I would say my personal highlight coming out of the event, and then I'll share the team's recap, is we sat down with a very valued partner and solved a problem that probably would not have gotten solved over a Zoom call, because there were high emotions and high stakes. And we were able to sit and have a 30-minute discussion, human to human, and get the problem solved by the time we left Dallas. So if anything, that was worth the 4-day event of starting at 8 a.m. and going until you make it up to your room past that lobby bar. But the big takeaways from my team were frequency was talked about a lot. I think we drove that discussion a bit because it was top of mind for us going into that event, but frequency capping, frequency monitoring. I always think that there's a buzzword coming out of these events, and it's usually video. For the last several years, I'm going to say it was frequency for us coming out of this event. We also talked a lot about cross-channel opportunities and unique activations. I was on a panel with my colleague Saba and our day-to-day rep at Your Mom's House talking about creative chemistry of when brands can utilize ad reads for more than a 60-second mid-roll, and how we can get creative with that, and how we have taken and approached these conversations as an agency. Is, there isn't a ton of new content coming out the last several years. How do we build on what we have? And I think that really led into a lot of really cool conversations with partners of like, what are we looking into? What are we interested in? How do we review these cross-channel and unique activations? And so that also became a really big highlight for the team.
Yeah, well, and I will say, like, I get really proud going to these events, and especially now with the expanded team. We probably had 10 different members of our team on different conversations on different stages, sometimes going on at the same time, which was awkward because it was like being on 2 dates at once a little bit, trying to support everybody. But I will say, I think that, like, I was very proud of the fact that our group was directing the conversation to some of the new places and not just the low-hanging fruit. You go to enough of these things, and I think you end up doing the same thing. You hear about attribution is hard, and here's the new dance we're all doing. This time it's the Macarena and whatever. And that's always going to be there. That's always going to be part of it. And then you get people going, programmatic is the future. Technology will save us all. People don't have to be involved in this anymore. And then you have another camp when the creators get involved. There's somebody that actually works with creators and they go, actually, like, don't just try to, force everything and control everything. Let hosts speak for themselves and get to know the brand. And like, by the time you get through that, that's kind of like the talk track that I feel like just gets recycled the whole time over and over again. Right. And I really felt that, anybody that's going to, try to pick up some of the videos or recordings of these events, check out our group, because we were pushing a lot of new conversations forward. Not the least of which, I mean, what Giles did with Pete at Podscribe, bringing real data and really like things that you could publish in a scientific journal forward, to say, hold on, we need to test some assumptions, and it's not just the thing that everybody's talking about. It may, very, very exciting that we get to be a part of that and have a bunch of people that think about, how to zig in the conversation when everybody's zagging, really bring new insights to the table, which obviously is an important value that we're trying to live out. So anyway, don't mean to be self-promoting, just proud of the group. Julia, you're always good with some insights. Tell us about your podcast movement and anything else that stood out to you.
Yeah, I made my panel debut. Very exciting. I have made a shift this year and started working more with the audience-based buying of targeted podcasts. And I felt like that shift was felt at Podcast Movement as well. And brands are moving towards more of a diversified strategy. I think, we all can agree that host-read reads are what is special about our medium, but I think that there is a place for that audience-based buying to be partnered with the host reads. And now it's about figuring out how we can best use our audience-based dollars to support those host reads. And that's by way of either the direct IO, still working directly with our partners, or programmatic. There was a lot of buzz around programmatic audio in the conversations I was having, but it's still very new in audio. And there's definitely limitations that we have in audio that they do not have in the more built out digital programmatic. And so there's a sense that everyone's still trying to figure out exactly how we move forward with those dollars. But I think the key now is figuring out how to balance those budgets and using our learnings from targeted podcasts to inform those host-read strategies. And that was echoed throughout the conference.
Yeah, it's such an interesting part of the conversation, because I think for a lot of years, we heard a lot of talk about it. And I think there were really early efforts. I mean, this is anytime there's technological disruption, right? You hear about it and then you get a first wave of people trying to execute it, and it's a mess. And then people retreat from that and they kind of go back to the other thing. And, we had to fight for a long time and be really vocal, Podcast Movement and other venues, to say, hey, don't sleep on the talent relationships, because everybody was looking for that level of, automation that was kind of threatening, I think, the heart of the industry, which is very relationship based and credibility based. But I think, especially those of us that came out of radio, we know that it is a both and world. And as the industry matures, it increasingly becomes a question not of, is it one thing or is it the other? It's how do you actually get these things to work in support of each other and not try to be so binary with all this? It's not just going to be programmatic spot running, and it's not just going to be host read ads and authentic relationships. Hopefully you can get the best of both worlds, and hopefully hosts can be integrated even to what gets bought in a more automated way or through impression-based buying, right? But it's great to see the industry growing up to the point that we can now start to have these conversations and look at the interactive effects of, where impressions fall and how they can be supportive without having to run 20 host ads in a week, or in some cases in a show, in an episode. But that you can actually get reminders at a lower cost and reinforce, some of that, marquee work that the foundation that the hosts lay. So very good stuff. And I will just add a few things from my end. Two things I was personally involved in. One was there was a screening for the documentary The Age of Audio, which we got to play a producing role in, and I got to add some contributions about the state of the industry. But it was amazing because it went all the way back to like Adam Curry and Steve Jobs and the early folks. And in the screening, I'm in the room with people that were really in the industry 20 years ago when it was more of an idea, and kind of looking back at how did we get here and how did the industry change? And, so much of our work has been about trying to preserve the rock and roll spirit that brought us here with the advancements of where it needs to go as we start dealing with these, behemoth platforms and new ways of video capabilities and sharing, that helps it scale and continue to be more accessible to more advertisers without kind of losing the soul of it. And I thought it was a really gratifying thing to watch. I hope as it gets out there more, Age of Audio is something that gets on everybody's radar, because I think it's an important piece of history to really understand the full story of this medium, and everything that it's meant to creators, as well as, those of us on the business side that have come in, and most importantly, to audiences, because it's really an industry that's built on passion, more than most channels, I think, can say. And then I was given 10 good minutes on the big stage at the end to talk about our What Brands Want report coming out of our Chief Audio Officer event. And, this was a sample of 35 advertisers, some of the largest in the space, coming together and saying, like, these are our challenges and this is what we want. And I think the cliff notes on it are that this was a sample of the top spenders in podcasts who prioritize podcasting clearly more than they do any other form of audio, whether that's streaming or radio or satellite radio. 2/3 of them are bottom of funnel marketers. So even though a lot of brands continue to come in, the ones that continue to be the backbone of the industry are looking at performance. And, we asked them, what is important to you? Like, what holds you back from being able to fully leverage this channel? And the biggest thing, beyond the shadow of a doubt, is standardized metrics across platforms. And some of that is the way that we define an impression. The fact that you have the, 3 leading distribution platforms looking at views versus downloads versus starts. And we're trying to make sense of that and have credible conversations with real businesses that are like, so there is no standard impression. And you can't just have one way to measure this thing the way I have with other channels. And the obstacle that creates, we saw that 74% of brands would increase their budgets, and some by very large margins, if they could just get the video side of the house to be commensurate in its measurability with what they see on the other side. Brands are concerned about ad load. The brand safety concern is less than it was in the past, but it's still real. The biggest thing that brands want to avoid is political extremism. But at the end of the day, we use this as a way to say to the podcasting industry, we need standards, and we need to be vocal in advocating with the large distribution platforms that they need to come together, and that's a charge that we're trying to lead. But it's not just because, we're do-gooders. There's a lot of money on the table that's getting bottlenecked for everybody, creators, platforms, brands. Everybody in the ecosystem is choked by the fact that there is no standardized way to define, measure, and define the industry and what a podcast is, measure impressions, and measure results in uniform ways. And that's a big problem that we need people being increasingly vocal to try to, urge the big players to come together and solve. So it was a productive conversation, and I think these themes were pervasive throughout. So that pretty much does it for our time. I do want to say a couple things that are very important. One is we have our own sponsors who help us make all of this great thought leadership possible. And typically they are partners that we work with on a day-to-day basis. And it is somewhat coincidental that I was just talking about measurement, and our sponsor today is Podscribe, who's been a partner to us for many years. They are, on a quest to make podcasting as measurable with the same type of precision that you see on digital channels. And I think they do a great job of that within what they can control. And the problem in our industry is not the tooling, it is the distribution and the fragmentation in distribution. But Podscribe is, clearly one of the leaders, and particularly in the fact that the name has pod in it, and probably by volume the largest leader in this space that offers measurement for podcasts and streaming audio. And they help you see in real time what's working, what shows, what episodes, what creatives, audience segments, even which devices and geos are pulling weight, so that you can get clarity on your impact. And you can push that data into your MTA model. That's a different conversation. We're going to have to do a meeting on, or a whole show on in MTAs, but they can work with your MTA, your MMM, because it's all through an API. I've got some more acronyms for you. So whether you're doing brand testing, you're a brand that's testing new shows, or you're a publisher trying to show ROI to your advertisers, Podscribe gives you the full funnel view that you need to turn insights into action. So if you want to see what smart audio measurement looks like, sign up with Podscribe and use the promo code if you can. We don't have a QR code for you today, but if you do new in all caps 20, all one word, NEW 20, you get 20% off your first 3 months. You can email partnerships@podscribe.com. That is pod, P-O-D, scribe, SCRIBE, to get started. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to everybody for listening to this special episode of the Media Roundtable. Thank you to Bryan for joining us, Julia, Courtney, James. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, and you may not know this, but we want you to be successful in podcasting and in audio and creator-based media. We also want you to use your influence for good. And we believe that you can align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes. And if you want us to help you with that, you can contact our agency, Oxford Road. Go to oxfordroad.com. Don't forget to sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's called The Influencer. It's free. Courtney reads it every day or every week, probably rereads it every day. Same with Julia and James. We live by this stuff, and we try to put stuff out there that we think helps you make better decisions as the industry moves so fast. Sign up for our newsletter. If you have feedback for us, it's at info@mediaroundtable.com. And don't forget to check out Ad Infinitum. That's Stu, our head of creatives podcast, about how to do the best audio ads in the world. As always, special thanks to Haley, Ruby, Bianca, Kyle, Prince, Everett, Neil, Olivia, and the team at Podcast One. And if I haven't told you before, influence responsibly.
Hey, this is Adam Carolla from The Adam Carolla Show. Summer is here, and Podcast One has a brand new sports podcast. It's the all-new Pac-Man Jones show called Politely Raw, now on Podcast One. Join former NFL star and Pro Bowl cornerback Pac-Man Jones as he brings you his unfiltered takes, raw interviews, and stories as only he can tell them. If you love sports, culture, and controversy, you're going to love Politely Raw, as nothing is off limits. This makes for an entertaining and compelling listen each and every time. The new Pac-Man Jones show, Politely Raw, episodes drop weekly and are available wherever you find podcasts.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.